Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Air Pollution Monitoring in 2019, the top questions answered. Before we get started, I wanted to go over a couple of housekeeping items. Today's session, as always, will be recorded and emailed to you afterwards. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, but as we're answering questions throughout the webinar, I want to encourage everybody to use the chat and the QA features freely throughout the webinar. Ask your questions, anything that's unclear, please send them our way. We'll try to cover as much as we can, as you can see in our agenda, and anything that you don't have answered, any questions that come up that we don't get to, somebody will follow up with you after the webinar. Today's host is Itai Rosenzweig. Itai is the Director of Global Business Development, Automotive, and we thought that he would be a great pick to take us on the final webinar of the year and to really sum up everything that we've learned this year and everything that you have taught us and everything we've had to teach you in order to understand how air pollution and air pollution monitoring works. If it's your first time in one of our webinars and it's your first time in coming into contact with BreezoMeter, we are the global leader in location-based, real-time air pollution, pollen, and fires data. And our mission is to help people reduce their exposure to dangerous air pollutants, improving the health and quality of life of millions of people worldwide. So with that, let's jump straight into the questions that have been asked in 2019, shall we? Itai, air quality doesn't impact me. This is what people are thinking all over the world. Looks pretty clean. It's only relevant if you live in China or India, right?
All right. Hey, Ronit. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for having me. I think it's a good opportunity maybe to try and tackle some of the questions that we've been asked and currently being asked quite often by many of our potential clients, existing customers. And I hope you'll find the session today very interactive. Please feel free to jump in, raise your hand, ask questions. We'll try and tackle as much as possible. And hopefully we'll manage to cover most of the topics that you sent us in advance. So regarding air pollution, is it relevant only in China or India? Maybe we can jump to the next slide and maybe show a quick movie and take it from there. If you take a look at the screen, I don't know if you can actually see the resolution that well, but you'll see that these are tweets coming in from all over the world. So basically the standard assumption that air quality is extremely poor in China and in India and maybe in other developing countries is true to a certain degree, but air quality impacts all of us globally, especially if you live in a large metropolitan area, in an urban area. Obviously, if there's a lot of traffic, if there are other major sources, all of them might be extremely harmful and hazards to your health. So first, it's not only China, it's not only India. It might be your hometown, and it might be your workplace, and it might be an industrial zone which is located right next to you. So all of them might be extremely dangerous for our health. It's not only in remote places, it's in our backyard.
In the post that you don't see, because my Twitter feed is a little bit blurry here, there are several articles, one from the US talking about worsening air pollution over the years after there was an improvement. It's talking about the air pollution in California during the wildfires. It's talking about air pollution might be making you bald. So, next question.
Go ahead.
So everybody's talking about air pollution. That's what we figured out in my Twitter feed. That was a little hard to see, but I know this is something that people ask from around the world, and we're talking about businesses, we're talking about laymen. Where does it actually come from?
All right, cool. It's a very important question. People have, the assumption that only if you live right next to a heavy industrial chemical plant or industrial zone, that will be the main cause for your deteriorating health or other symptoms. But if you take a look at the slide, you can see various sources, that are considered to be sources for poor air quality. It is divided. I don't want to get too technical here, but if you take a look at it really from like a bird's overview, you'll see the primary pollutants, you'll see the secondary pollutants, and let's try and concentrate on the primary ones. I'll explain that later on. But if you take a look at your hometown, obviously it will be any kind of factory, industrial site, zone, chemical plants. Obviously, it might be any wildfires happening around, might be even in a radius of 50 kilometers or even like 25, 30, 45 miles. It might be any kind of traffic, anywhere from an 18-wheelers with an exhaust that wasn't maintained, all the way to private cars and even hybrid cars, by the way. Many of them do cause excessive soot and particulate matter. So you can see all of them, including, of course, some, I would say, some exterior, not anthropogenic. By the way, anthropogenic, it's everything which is man-made. And you can see other sources, but we'll try and skip them just to make sure that this will be extremely intuitive. If you jump to the next slide, please, Ronit, we can see another source, which is called particulate matter. I'm sure that many of you heard the phrase PM 2.5, PM10. So just to make sure that all of us are aligned, PM is considered to be particulate matter, and PM 2.5 is any kind of particulate matter up to 2.5 microns. Same goes for PM10, the same idea, up to 10 microns. What we're looking at here, it's a map being generated by NASA that actually shows you the air dispersion of particulate matter, which many of it is being generated within Africa, around the Sahara Desert. And you can see that using the current Gulf Stream and other streams, which are quite constant in our globe, you can see that particulate matter can cover and travel huge distance. For example, it can travel all the way from Africa to South America, obviously all of the Middle East, and definitely goes into the southern part of Europe. So when you're looking at pollutants, you need to think about it as a global issue. And many times the source of the pollution might be carried from huge distances. So it's not only what you see around your house or around your hometown, it can be something that was generated even across the border from a completely different or other country.
So local pollution, even though there is local pollution, which I'll explain in a minute, is also global pollution regardless.
Exactly. All right. Ronit, next slide. All right. We already see that some questions are popping. We'll try and sort them. All right. Next. So a very standard and obvious. How many of you drive a car? I'm sure that most of you. Some of you drive it to work every day, back and forth. Some of you are traveling a bit more. Some of you are using your car for commercial, private use. But if you take a look, Ronit, we need to be a bit of sync here. If you take a look, for example, at traffic is one of the major contributors to poor air pollution, especially if you live in an urban area, large metropolitan area. It doesn't matter if it would be New York City, LA, Stuttgart in Germany, New Delhi, Pune, Bangalore, and obviously if you travel all the way to Chengdu, Shanghai, and other places, you need to get familiar that usually the in-cabin of a car might be up to 7 times more polluted than the outdoor. Again, up to 7 times more polluted than the outdoor. And an average American driver spends around 3 years of his life on the road, meaning that when driving, because we basically intake or inhale all of the pollution which is being emitted from the exhaust of all of the cars around us. So we need to know how to tackle it. We need to know what we're being exposed to. We need to understand that unless we take specific measures, traffic might be one of the worst contributors to poor air quality. It's very hard to see the screen here, so we'll try and focus. Again, we mentioned the PM2.5 and NO2. NO2 stands for nitrogen dioxide. And when you look at some of the cars, and again, they are being broken into several groups. So you have all of the EVs, As we know, there's no exhaust. Basically, there's no combustion engine. So the emission from the exhaust is completely different. But if you take a look at hybrid, private cars, commercial cars, 18-wheelers, trucks, whatever you have in mind, all of them use combustion, either diesel or gas, and all of them emit huge amounts of nitrogen dioxide and particulate matter. So if we had the ability to be in a traffic area, or in an area where traffic was completely electrical, that might have an impact, a true change. But until we get there, hopefully we'll see some changes, I would say, in the next 15, 20, even 30 years. But until we get there, traffic continues to be one of the major contributors to pollution, especially in urban areas.
All right, so the issue is global, it's local, it's not being solved anytime soon. Next question. Global enterprises want to know, why now?
All right, that's a really interesting topic. Maybe we can jump to the next slide. I think we'll answer. Maybe I'll share it, while you're reading, I'll explain this from our perspective, especially from a business development perspective. We see great interest in the past. Again, BreezoMeter has been around for the past 6.5, almost 7 years. And obviously at the beginning, we saw very low interest. And I would say the market wasn't knowledgeable about the impact of air quality. What is air quality? And in the past few years, we see more and more global enterprises, anywhere from the most famous companies that you can think of, are showing interest in air quality. And not because they suddenly, all of them are interested in sustainability. It might, in some cases it is. Maybe some of them have their own policies and so on, restrictions, regulations. But we can say that the majority of the clients worldwide, or the majority of the end users, are interested to understand what they're breathing. What is the impact of air quality? So more and more companies are showing interest on how can we work with, or how can we address sustainability? So if you look at it, why now? Because it matters. Because these are the clients that you need to serve, because they care about your products, they care about your policy, they care about what you do.
Good point. Question 4. So all these companies, they know why it's important, but a lot of them are coming to us and they're saying, what is the most important pollutant that they need to be aware of? We need to sort of cover the pollutants and their effects as part of this conversation.
Yeah, I'll jump to the slide for a second. This is a really good point. People say, okay, so which pollutant is the most important? Which one will actually impact me? Should I take specific measures against each and every one of them? Should I wear a gas mask? What should I do, basically? How can I protect myself and my family? And it's really important to understand that when you're speaking of air quality is broken into various types of pollutants. Now, the majority of the governments worldwide established a certain index, and the index contains the 6 top pollutants. So you can see CO, which stands for carbon monoxide, NO2, which is nitrogen dioxide, O3, ozone, PM10, particulate matter, PM2.5, and if you look at the bottom, sorry for that, we just need to move it here. Oh, sorry for that. And the last one is SO2, which is sulfur dioxide. Each one of them, and again, there's no need to read all of the table. We'll send it afterwards so you can actually drill down into the numbers and to the sources and effects. But if you are, for example, if you're pregnant, just for the sake of it, if you're pregnant, it might be that your immune system will be a bit more sensitive. If you suffer from some kind of respiratory condition, for example, you're asthmatic, or on the other end, you might suffer from COPD. Again, standing outside, knowing that there is a sandstorm, or standing outside right next to a very huge wildfire, it's not a wise decision. Same goes, for example, if you have toddlers or young kids. They might be extremely sensitive to ozone. It's not the ozone that you see in the outer layer of the stratosphere, protecting the Earth. That's the ozone which is closer to the Earth. Again, I don't want to get too technical here, But same goes for the sulfur dioxide and carbon monoxide and the CO. Each one of them impact us differently. So obviously you can look at an index and say, you know what, I take it, all of them in the same package. And if you wish to be a bit more specific, it might be that the majority of the pollutants in your area might be extremely well, but there's a certain pollutant, for example, PM2.5, which is extremely high. And that's the one that you need to tackle in that case. So it's really important to understand the differences and not to take, or not to be concerned, but at the same time understand the various impacts that each one of them have.
Now that we have the pollutants down, it's important that we talk about how it's measured, and we're talking about generally what's out there. What are the methods that are used for people to understand how much NO2, how much SO2? Take us through it.
All right, cool. So looking at measurements. When we look at measurements, it's important to understand the key players. So first of all, let me introduce the EPA. For those of you who are familiar, obviously, in the United States Environmental Protection Agency, they are considered to be the most trusted, I would say, leading organization worldwide, determining all sorts of regulations, standards, and so on. In many cases, whatever they determine will be used globally, again, with some modifications. But basically, they have a wide and almost unlimited access to data globally related to air quality. So major player is the Environmental Protection Agency. A second indication of determining measurements is obviously the stations, the government monitoring stations. This is a great picture that you managed to find, Ronit.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is a government monitoring station. You can see by the size of it, it's like a small crate. And basically it's a walk-in room that has all sorts of measurements. The estimated cost of such device can get all the way to like $150,000 per device. No, not cheap at all. And they are deployed randomly in multiple places. Sometimes you might have one per city. In some other cases, you might have a few more. But again, this is the device. So if you have the EPA determining the regulations, you have the various stations. And another aspect that we can take into consideration, can we play the movie?
Hopefully it will be on mute.
All right.
It's on mute.
Cool. So the third aspect is using satellites. Satellites in many cases are used or owned by various organizations, in this case, a few owned by NASA. And they are basically monitoring the Earth perpendicular and looking at the density of the air and so on, so they can actually determine what is the level of pollution and so on. So looking at the EPA, looking at satellites, looking at the government monitoring stations, all of them all together. Ronit, with your permission, I'm skipping the movie here. Yeah. Basically what we do is we are capable of determining a certain index, a certain indication. So you get all of the measurements, you have the regulation. So now you have an index. And the index might be determined according to the country, or, and I'll explain this in a second, according to other standards. So on the right side, you can see, for example, the United States Air Quality Index, which goes all the way from 0 to 500. 0 is considered to be 0 to 50 is considered good, while 301 to 500 is considered to be hazards. On the same side, if you look at the European scale, it goes from 0 to 100. And if you look at the Hong Kong one, it is divided into 5 different categories. And the list goes on and on and on. You can find more than 57, if I recall correctly, different air quality indexes globally. Maybe I'm missing some. But the main idea is that each one of them will provide you some kind of guidelines on what you're experiencing. Now, an interesting aspect would be that if, for example, I'm standing, assuming that within the US, I'm standing right next to the border, and for some reason, right, we're missing here something?
Is this the question where you're looking
for? Thank you very much. All right. So,
you read your mind.
Yeah, thank you very much. So when we're looking at the indexes, obviously you can, you have some questions. So Ronit can run through the questions really briefly.
Sure. They're all questions we receive about stations, about the indexes, the local AQI versus BreezoMeter AQI, and they go as follows. Can we rely on stations alone? Are these stations accurate? What happens if I'm standing on the border of US and Canada? I drive a mile into Canada. I have different index from the US. How can I compare? How do I know the level of pollution?
All right, thank you very much. So again, going back to my point, indexes are different by definition, just because of the government regulations, because of the environmental office in every country, because of policy and politics and many other aspects. So if you take a look, for example, on the right side, you see the US EPA AQI, again, with all of the measurements, with the different categories and the various pollutants. But as Ronit said, listen, if you're traveling 1 mile, you might be given with completely different measurements. So that's a problem that we decided to tackle a few years ago by creating an index, which is basically, I don't want to say consolidates, but at the end, basically it aligns with all of the local indexes, and it provides you with one clear global air quality index, which is called BACI. It stands for BreezoMeter Air Quality Index. And this one runs on the left side from 0 to 100. Basically, it's the opposite. 0 is considered to be worse or very poor air quality, while 100 is considered to be really, really good air quality or excellent. And that enables us to take advantage of all of the knowledge and all of the data sources that we might encounter in order to provide a very clear and homogenic index that you can actually travel from one country to another. And each time you will be given, or you will be able to enjoy the air quality indication at the same standard. So there's no need to jump and get familiar with different type of indexes, but just to rely on one, and it will do all of the math and calculation on the back end. So basically you're just given with a number between 0 to 100.
Universal air pollution language.
You are the best. All right. So another topic that we wanted to understand was the validation, meaning how accurate stations are. Is it sufficient to rely on government stations? So, what? Alone. So if I'll go back to the picture that we saw before of the government station, you'll see it's a big device. Most of the government stations are being maintained and calibrated quite often by a third party. Usually it's a company being hired by the environmental office. And they're considered to be a really good source for data to a certain degree with some limitations. So if we take a look at the table, for example, we want to understand if the data is good or not. So I don't want to get too technical here. I'll just fast forward on some of the topics. So values might be, or some of the stations might get clogged just because of very, very severe poor air quality. For example, wildfires, another indication, sandstorms. Some of them are not being calibrated as often as they should. Some of them lack the ability to transmit data in real time, so they only provide data in delay. So when you look at it, this is a good example that we saw. If you take a look at the left side, you can see real-time indication. This is October 28, 2019, 6 a.m. Pacific time. Take a look at Auckland. You can actually see there is no indication on the upper left corner for any kind of wildfire or severe or poor air quality. Take a look at the same data 20 minutes later. You can see that this data was altered, or basically it was changed to a certain degree.
Updated with the archive, the data. And then you can see in the next slide that we, at the same time as the 6 a.m., we reported the wildfire data.
Yeah. So in that case, if we're trying to tackle the second topic is the time. The fact that some of the stations are delayed by definition, they do not provide with sufficient data. They do not provide with real-time data, meaning that BreezoMeter basically fits in extremely well, providing the data in real time, showing values in real time, and taking into consideration everything that actually happens without the need to go backwards and change the data. Now, another important aspect is if you take a look at it and break it down for the pollutants, you can actually see that on the upper left corner, Ronit, you're smiling? You want to explain this?
No, this is showing, I'll let Itai tell you, but it's during a Vancouver event.
Yeah.
And I switched the slides around so it says same fire event, but this is the Vancouver fire event of 2018, I believe, where the stations did not report PM data. So as you can see, they didn't report the fire event, whereas what we saw at the same time was poor air quality because we were able to report the particulate matter activity.
So if I'll try to simplify it, the fact that you have a station, a government monitoring station right next to you, it's excellent. Not all of the stations are monitoring all of the pollutants. It's important to understand it. It might be that a certain government station will monitor only PM 2.5, while some others will monitor other pollutants. And again, this is being deployed randomly by the environmental office. In many cases, it's a discussion revolving around costs and other aspects. No need to get into that. Next. Another topic that we've mentioned was the limitation of space, or can stations using only data or station data is sufficient enough? We can play a movie, a quick one. And if you take a look at it, you can actually see that even though there's a wildfire, some of the stations were already so saturated with pollution, they basically did not report any activity, or the values that they reported were so misaligned with what's happening, is that the data at the end wasn't accurate. And if you take a look at the bottom right corner, you can actually see a station that, in that case, if we take a look at it, which was very close to the fire, but did not report any values related to that wildfire, just because it was clogged or because it didn't have the right sensors. So basically, the fact that you have a government monitoring station is not sufficient, and you cannot only rely on that. You need to know that you can be given with all of the pollutants in every location in real time. All right. Now, I want to tackle and try and run it. How much time do we have?
Guys, if you let us, we're going to go a couple minutes over time, because I think these are the big questions that you want to hear. So we're going to let Itai take it. Stick with us. We're almost there. These are the big ones.
All right. Another question that we heard was regarding the technology, or basically what makes BreezoMeter technology work, or how does it work? So I want to explain something regarding the station, and I think it will make a lot of sense, and I see, again, additional questions. If you take a look, for example, at traditional solutions, assuming that you have a government monitoring station, as you can see on the screen, it's a single data source, meaning that whatever pollutants are being monitored by that station, again, a lot of dependency, if it was calibrated, if it was maintained, and so on, eventually it provides you with a certain value. It provides you with a certain accuracy, which is limited by definition to the device accuracy, meaning it's a hardware. Hardware have limitation by definition. So the data being collected on that station is relevant for a certain radius, all right? Eventually, most of the stations do not provide the data in real time. They provide it between 2 to 24 hours delay. Why? Just because because some of the environmental officers are trying to be as cost effective as possible. So there's no live transmission. It's not like using your mobile and watching Netflix and so on. Everything is being delayed. When you look at BreezoMeter, we realized that a long time ago, relying only on government station is not sufficient. We need to use multiple or multi-layers data approach. So when you look at it, basically we take into consideration multiple aspects. The first one is using GPS. GPS, or what you might consider as a GIS, topographical indication. It really matters if you're standing on top of a mountain or if you're standing in a valley. It's really important to take into consideration traffic data. Try to imagine you and your colleague, you and your friend are standing in the same city at the same time. You're standing, for example, in the city center, in the plaza, or you're standing, you know what, you're standing in a beautiful garden, and your friend is standing 1 kilometer or half a mile away from you, but he's standing right next to a congested intersection. Same city, same time, completely different air quality indication. So traffic, real-time, rush hour, type of vehicles, winds, and so on, all of them need to be taken into consideration. Now, that's not sufficient, because if this is a very, very windy day, pollutants might be carried away all the way from one side of the city to another. On the contrary, if it's a rainy day, most of the pollutants, especially if it's particulate matter, like dust particles and others, most of them will be carried down to the ground, just because they were getting wet. Now, we added 2 more layers because we wanted to refine the data. So another layer that was added was satellite. They provide us really good indication for wildfires and sandstorms and other indications. And the last one that was added a few months ago is another layer of fires and smoke. meaning that we can actually take into consideration wildfires, the plume, the impact, and how it actually impacts the air quality in that specific area. I try to imagine all this huge stack of data sources being crunched and combined together in order to generate a very, very clear indication of the air quality around you. Yeah, all right. Ronit is giving me all sorts of signs here, so I just wanted to align. Making a long story short, data is being collected, then we calculate the air quality every 500 meters again and again. A lot of machine learning, a lot of AI is being involved. The end result is that BreezoMeter can provide in real time indication of the air quality around you to a resolution of about 250 meters or 0.3 miles. I'm sorry, 0.2 miles. Ronit?
Keep going.
Cool. All right. We'll try and squeeze in maybe 2 more questions and we'll stop just to make sure that we...
I think this might be the last one.
Yeah? All right, cool. You're the big boss here. So question 12, how accurate is BreezoMeter? I really fast forward. One of the major challenges when having or trying to provide air quality data is the fact that if you take into consideration data that was generated from, for example, government monitoring stations, take a look at this image. You have 3 different stations. If you're standing right next to a station, the data will be extremely accurate. What happens if you drive away? If you drive far away from a station? Even if you drive 2 kilometers or 3 kilometers, you don't need to drive 100 miles. No need for that. So not all of us reside, not all of us live right next to a government monitoring station. So all of us are traveling between one city to another, between one station to another. And basically the gaps that you see with the exclamation marks need to be filled. This is the places where BreezoMeter shines, is the ability to give the station data indication, not only there, but all around it. The way that we do that is by doing a lot of validation for the data accuracy and methodology behind it and all of the algorithms. We use a methodology called leave one out, which is very, very common in many of the weather providers globally. It is called leave one out, in which we take into consideration the actual values that were generated by the station. Then we consider this as ground truth. And then what we do, if you take a look at the left side, we basically remove, sorry for that, we basically remove that station. You'll see the circle that was just disappeared.
Magic.
Yep. And we will run the algorithm, basically there another full cycle, and we'll try to project what would be the values of the pollutants or the index or anything else in that specific location. And afterwards, obviously, we'll compare the real measurements from the station and the results that we have projected to that specific location. Now, even though it seems extremely complicated, even to explain that, try to imagine this is being done automatically globally to all of the endpoints that we have. We're speaking about 7.2 billion calculations being done one after another. So the accuracy or the level of accuracy in BreezoMeter is considered to be the highest. And I can share that in some of the countries globally, we are providing accuracy level of about 90% to most of the areas. Again, we need to exclude if you're standing in the center of the Gobi Desert. Obviously, there are no data sources, so the accuracy might decrease. But if we need to be very, very straightforward, we would say that the average accuracy at BreezoMeter will be above 90 in most of the in most of Europe, US, and the majority of Asia. Maybe last slide, and we're done. Yeah, I think we pretty much covered it. Again, is the ability of BreezoMeter. You know what? We can skip this. I think we just discussed it.
Fabulous. So, guys, unfortunately, we took you through all of the questions that we could in this amount of time. I know there's tons more that we wanted to talk about, and there's tons more of questions that you guys probably have. Everything that you sent through now, we will get back to you with an answer. And any other questions that you have, please feel free to follow up with me, with Itai, with anybody that you're in contact with at BreezoMeter, or just contact us. And we'd be glad to catch you up on anything you're missing. I wanted to take a minute. Yes, Itai, would you like to?
No, please wrap it up. I just want to say something.
Go ahead. Feel free.
Again, I've seen, just to be very, very transparent, I'm looking at all of the messages and all of the questions that you submitted during the webinar. Please, I'll be more than happy to answer each one of them. I don't know if you have my email here, Ronit? or if they maybe can send it to you and you will forward me.
Yes, I can do that.
I
Please
promise.
be in touch with me if you're not already in touch with Itai.
All right, cool. So please send all of the questions to Ronit via the email that you were given. And I promise to answer each one of you exactly to the questions that you asked. And I apologize. I just want to make sure that everybody will wrap up on time.
So thanks again. Thanks, Itai, for taking the time and running through with all of your expertise in the area. Thank you guys for being with us, for being patient with going over time. And I look forward to seeing you guys all in the next webinar. Have a good one for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.